People warned me about Adrian Cole the way sailors warn each other about reefs. Softly at first, like maybe you'll steer clear on your own, then louder when they realize you won't. The cautions came disguised as gossip in the market, as concerned questions from coworkers, as a neighbor's awkward silence that said too much. Even the pastor's wife squeezed my hands after service and told me to seek discernment, which in our town was the gentle word for run. I pretended not to hear any of it, because the version of me that wanted to believe in love was louder than wisdom. Adrien didn't so much enter a room as edit it. His storm-gray eyes made you feel arranged, curated, seen. His voice put commas in your breath. He remembered what you liked before you liked it publicly and quoted books you were saving for later. When he laughed, the sound made strangers want to say yes to whatever came next. He made me feel chosen, and chosen is a narcotic when you've spent years being ordinary. My cousin Miriam didn't bother with euphemisms. One night in her kitchen, with the kettle shouting and the window sweating, she said, 3 women got serious with him, and then they vanished. No luggage, no notes, just gone. Promise me you'll listen. I told her people disappear every day. She said, not like this, and slid a folder across the table, printouts, photos, the sort of evidence an amateur detective collects when love forces someone else to investigate. I pushed it back because nothing ruins a beautiful evening like the truth. To balance the dread, Adrien piled on devotion. Roses arrived at my desk without a card because he said, you should never have to wonder who loves you. He fed me old poetry and new pasta and the kind of compliments that make you laugh just to break the spell. Sometimes his attentiveness pinched. He knew when I skipped lunch or took the late train before I told him, but he shrugged it off as paying attention. And what woman argues with being noticed? He proposed under a canopy of white lights in his garden as if he'd rented the night's permission. Marry me, Clara, he said, voice unsteady the way mountains are unsteady only in earthquakes. Let's write our own story. Behind him, the trees held their breath. In front of him, I forgot how to listen to warnings. The yes that jumped from my mouth felt like a door swinging wide and a lock sliding into place at the same time. The wedding was a painting. Lilies, polished wood, the choir's honeyed chords. When the officiant asked about objections, silence stretched so thin my bones could see through it. I expected Miriam to stand. She stared at the floor and held herself together with her jaw. I said I do with the elegance of a person who has practiced drowning. The house he bought for us waited behind an iron gate as if it had already taken my measurements. Ivy softened the stone, but the windows were unblinking eyes. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax, books, and secrets kept out of politeness. The portraits along the stair, women rendered in old oils, wore expressions that could have been serenity or surrender. Home, Adrien said, and the word sounded rehearsed. Marriage in the first month is an enthusiastic host. It offered us routine with silk gloves, breakfast in the sunroom, afternoons in the conservatory, evenings in a music room with a piano that remembered every wrong note. But there were doors I was asked not to open, rooms with memories better left alone, he said, each locked with the neatness of a habit. At night, I woke to the soft language of keys and the mild protest of floorboards. In the morning, he was a hymn in a good suit. The house had its own weather. In daylight, it was cool and reasonable, the kind of place where you could believe nothing bad had ever happened. After midnight, it grew a second pulse. The pipes sighed like long sentences. Curtains moved when the windows were shut. I told myself old houses creak, but sometimes the sounds were with intention, a gentle rhythm like someone swallowing tears. On our 1-month anniversary, he fastened a silver teardrop pendant around my neck, the metal cool as a truth. It belonged to someone dear, he said, and now it belongs to you. The engraving was a nest of swirls, leaves, waves, fingerprints, depending how you tilted it. It fell into the notch above my heart, like it had been cast from that hollow. The pendant gave me dreams. In them, I stood by a deep well and lowered the teardrop on its chain into the dark until the links grew cold in my hand. I always woke up before the splash. The next afternoon, while Adrien was out on business in that casual way that meant don't ask, I wandered the library, a cathedral of leather spines. Behind a row of histories, my palm found a seam in the paneling. A soft push revealed a narrow gap, and inside it, an old envelope giving off the quiet of forgotten things. The photograph inside showed a smiling young woman with summer in her hair and the same pendant at her throat. Beneath it, a name in a looping script. Evelyn. The room leaned closer. I slipped the photo back and pressed the panel shut, but possession had already turned into responsibility. Once a secret knows you, it follows you around. I started finding keys the way some people find feathers. On hooks by the back door, in a bowl by the piano, inside a pocket of the jacket, he draped just so over a chair. Their weight in my hand felt like a grammar lesson. This opens, that doesn't. Here is a sentence that ends in a period called no. He'd catch me looking at a doorknob and say, curiosity is a compliment, but discretion is love. I trained my smile to agree. One night, clouds pressed low enough to be mistaken for a ceiling, and Adrian called to say he'd be late. When the house finally exhaled his absence, I went to his study and opened the drawer where he kept pens too elegant for the truth. A ring of keys waited, heavy as a small argument with God. I moved down the corridor like a person balancing water in both hands, testing keys and locks by logic that felt borrowed from someone braver. The seventh key spoke to the third door on the left, which had always seemed to pay attention. The latch sighed. I stepped into a room that tried to pretend it was a celebration. Soft light, a faint scent of lavender. But the air told the real story, grief with good manners. Photographs covered the walls in tidy frames. Women looked out at me, smiling like somebody had just told the right joke. At the throat of each one, the teardrop pendant, shining like a small moon. On a dresser, a velvet tray held a neat row of pendants identical to mine, each chain pooled like a quiet river. A card beside them listed dates in Adrian's precise hand, little subscriptions to forever. One pendant felt warm when I touched it, as if memory had a temperature. I kept telling myself that investigation is not betrayal. The room kept telling me denial is. Near the corner, a frame hung a little crooked, a flaw the eye loves. The woman inside had my hair, my mouth, my eyes searching for a better story. She wore the pendant I was wearing. Beneath, in the exact slant of my own handwriting, a single word, forever. I stepped back too fast, caught my heel on a low box, and spilled letters across the rug like startled birds. I gathered them with shaking hands and read in fragments, because full sentences are too dangerous. You won't believe the garden. He notices everything. I feel watched even when he's away. Names Miriam had whispered sat under the ink. Evelyn, Liza, Maud. The paper held the faintest perfume of a life interrupted. Some letters ended midline, the way a breath ends when it's stolen. Footsteps arrived behind me, unhurried and certain, followed by the low courtesy of a door clicking home. I turned and found Adrien in the doorway, hands empty, eyes full. He looked at the walls as if inspecting the progress of a museum he curated for an audience of one. Then he looked at me with a tenderness that wanted applause. I told you, he said, soft enough to bruise. Some doors should never be opened. Who are they? I asked, though my throat already knew. My voice was wired trying to pretend it was iron. He stepped inside, and the room got smaller the way dusk gets smaller around a house. Edges softened, escapes uncertain. They were mine, he said, almost fondly. For a time. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. You killed them, I managed, and the word killed felt too large for my mouth. He tilted his head like he was considering a painting from a better angle. Don't be vulgar, he said. People betray what they swear to love. I did what anyone does with perishable, priceless things. His gaze slid to the tray of pendants. I preserved them. The word crossed the floor and shackled my ankle. The mind bargains when the body can't. "If you love me, prove it," I said, hating the quiver stitched through the plea. "Let me breathe. Let me see my sister. Let me stand in daylight without asking permission." He smiled as if I'd told a joke that almost landed. "Breathing is permitted," he said. "Leaving is not." His pocket chimed, keys kissing. I learned the difference between surrender and rehearsal that night. I kissed him until his breathing slowed, until ownership mistook itself for safety, until sleep took him with the entitlement of a king. Then I slid from the bed and let the hallway fit itself to my feet like a route destiny had laid down in chalk. I wanted only a handful of letters, enough to force the world to step in. But evidence is greedy, and so is fear. I packed my pockets with pages and my chest with courage, then turned toward the door that had promised exit. A floorboard sang under my heel. The house trader told him. His shadow appeared first, tall as a closed verdict. "Going somewhere, love?" he asked, mild as the weather. I gripped a brass candlestick, not because it was wise, but because it was there. He looked at my fist, then at my face, and gave me the patient smile teachers save for slow learners. "Those aren't evidence," he said, nodding at the letters. "They're relics." I swung. He moved his head a whisper to the left, and the candlestick smashed a frame instead, glass falling like hard rain. The room flinched as one organism. That half-second of shock opened a crack in time wide enough to step through. I ran. The corridor tried to grow longer in the way fear stretches distance. I kept my eyes on the stairs and trusted my legs to remember what childhood taught them. The front door was a judge, grave, imposing, allegedly impartial. I fumbled the keys with hands disloyal to calm. Behind me, Adrian's steps were unhurried confidence. "Clara!" he called, making my name into the first line of a ritual. A key finally found its lock, recognition clicked, and the mechanism confessed itself with a blessed clack. I hauled the door open and let the night throw its cold across my face like a lifeline. I bolted into it and left the definition of marriage in the foyer. Gravel bit my bare feet. Hedges reached out like nosy ants. His voice carried behind me, not angry, certain. "You can't run from forever." Headlights sliced the dark, and brakes squealed their disbelief an instant before the car skidded to a stop. The passenger door jerked open, and Miriam's face appeared, terrified, blazing. "Get in." I threw myself and the letters inside. She punched the gas like liberation had pedals. He took a step into the beam, beautiful like a myth you could only love if you didn't know how to read myths. Then he vanished into the rear view, getting smaller without getting less dangerous. I shook so hard the seat rattled. Miriam drove like speed could cauterize a wound. I told her everything in shards sharp enough to cut the future into a different shape. At the station, fluorescent light bleached the story to facts. A detective with a soft voice and a hard pen listened like a person building a shelter one nail at a time. We bagged letters and logged photos. Even the pendant I peeled from my throat with fingers that shook. When she asked if he'd ever hit me, I said no, and watched her nod with a sadness that understood how many kinds of violence never use hands. Dawn found his house no longer his, swarmed by people who knew how to translate wood and earth. Dogs spoke the truth to the soil. Cameras blinked their metallic eyelids. Investigators pried at baseboards while the garden surrendered small confessions, hairpins, a cracked compact mirror, the corner of a photograph not ready to be whole. The conservatory's floor yielded a cedar-lined room where labeled drawers held trinkets that once held women. One drawer bore my name. It was empty. They brought him out in cuffs, as composed as a man accepting an inconvenient award. He scanned the scene until he found me wrapped in a police station blanket that smelled like recycled weather. His mouth shaped the same word it always chose when he wanted to turn a promise into an order. Forever. The cameras loved the angle. Monsters are photogenic when they believe their character arc is misunderstood. Miriam took me home and wrapped the apartment around me like a sentence that ends in safety. Sleep learned new tricks, short, shallow, mean. In dreams, I walked his corridors and found doors that locked from the inside. Some mornings, I woke up clutching my throat, searching for the pendant I had surrendered to evidence, still feeling its cold insistence, still hearing the small lie it tells. You are chosen, which is different from you are safe. The prosecutor laid out the case like an architect. Photos, letters, forensics, a blueprint of a house built to contain other people's futures. I said yes to testifying because no is a luxury for the living that the dead can't access. Reporters hunted my schedule and fed on the same 3 words. Knew, suspected, ignored. Miriam stood guard. Exhaustion drained of everything glamorous. When she finally slept, I covered her with a blanket and cried without noise. The trial turned the courthouse into a theater where reverence rented space from spectacle. The jury learned the mansion room by room through testimony and photographs that refused to age. Experts spoke about possession disguised as devotion, about the way some men replace vows with nets. When I took the stand, my hands found each other like survivors, and I told the truth in boards and planks, building a bridge out of a night I should not have lived through. Adrien testified in the calm of a man who believes good tailoring persuades. He spoke of my fragile state, of grief inventing ghosts, of a pendant as a romantic repetition, not a signature. The jury listened with the respectful horror of diners, realizing what the kitchen does to make the meal pretty. When he stepped down, his eyes searched for mine with the entitlement of a collector checking inventory. I let him find nothing. Verdict day smelled like wet paper and metal. Guilty rendered itself in layers. On this count and that multiplied until years became geography, he would not cross again. The room exhaled as if oxygen had been on trial as well. They led him away, and he twisted for one last look, the same word on his lips, an incantation he couldn't stop performing. The click of the courtroom door behind him sounded like a chapter refusing a sequel. Healing did not arrive as a parade. It came as unspectacular chores that proved I still belonged to days. I learned my neighborhood by foot, naming trees and stray cats and the way certain sidewalks crack like palmistry. I cooked real food and ate it while sitting down. Some evenings I let the television talk me to sleep like benign thunder. Other nights, the quiet crowded me, and I sat in the bathroom with the shower running, letting steam lay a hand on my chest until my breath listened. The postcards started with a city I'd never visited and a single word in his careful hand. Soon. Then near. Then always. The police bagged them and filed them under harassments that don't fit neatly on forms. I taped them inside a cupboard, so they couldn't colonize my walls. When Miriam said, "He's locked away," I asked why my bones still counted keys when I climbed the stairs. She held my gaze and said, "Sometimes a body learns a habit of fear. That's not the same thing as danger." I returned to the river with a spare pendant I'd found in the bottom of my purse, a twin I don't remember keeping. I felt its weight and the weight of everything it meant. Then I fed it to the water. The river accepted without ceremony, which is the river's way of being kind. It lets you keep the meaning while it erases the evidence. I walked home lighter by an ounce of silver and a pound of ritual. I wrote letters to the women he had turned into stories without permission. I told them about the trial and the garden and the drawer with my name in it left empty. I told them the small things that almost make a life. How cinnamon tastes different when you're not afraid. How sunlight on a kitchen floor can feel like a hand you trust. I read the letters aloud and burned them in a bowl on the balcony, letting the smoke braid itself with the night. Time, stubborn and ordinary, did what it always does when you don't interrupt it. It made a little more of me. I said yes to a part-time job shelving books, where the quiet is honest. I said no to a handsome man who treated no like a complete sentence and thanked me for it. I looked in mirrors without waiting to see a photograph I hadn't consented to pose for. I learned boredom again, and boredom is a mercy. One evening, I paused at a jeweler's window where a teardrop pendant sat among rings that believed in forever. This one was glass, not silver. Light swirled inside like a small, captured weather. I touched the place above my heart where old weight used to live and found only a pulse that remembered its work. I considered buying it and then didn't, pleased by the fact that nothing terrible followed my refusal. Choice without consequence felt like a skill I'd relearned. People still warn me, sometimes about shortcuts after dark, about who deserves the softest parts of me, about the cost of saying yes. I hear them the way I should have heard the first warnings, not as limitations, but as invitations to keep my life. When I think of forever, it's not a lock or a verdict or a vow made of iron. It's the river's patient music teaching my feet what to do next. I step up to my knees and let it carry what I'm carrying. And when I climb out, the night has made room for morning. Thanks for watching.